300 chairs. Not one person sitting in them. A chandelier poured golden light over an empty ballroom. A three-tier cake stood untouched in the center of the room, its candles unlit. Every glass had been polished. Every name on the guest list had said yes. And still, at 7 o'clock, the doors did not open. A woman sat alone in her wheelchair, staring at rows of empty seats, fighting back tears she refused to let fall. She wasn't just anyone. She was one of the most successful CEOs in the country. And on the one night she had hoped to feel remembered, she had never felt more invisible. This is Unstoppable Stories, and today you'll discover how one ordinary man, carrying nothing but an old backpack in his daughter's hand, walked through a door that everyone else had already walked away from and changed a life he'd never even met. Before the accident, Emma Lawson's name was printed in every business magazine in the country. She had built one of the largest technology companies in America before she turned 40. Newspapers called her unstoppable. Investors trusted her instincts before she'd even finished explaining them. Employees said she was the most honest person in any room she walked into. She had earned every bit of it. 80-hour days, years of rejection from investors who didn't believe a woman could run a company that size. Nights spent rebuilding pitch decks after being laughed out of boardrooms. She had clawed her way to the top of an industry that had told her again and again that she didn't belong there. Then, one rainy night, a truck lost control on a slick highway and slammed into her car. She survived. Her spine did not. Overnight, the woman who had never needed anyone's permission became dependent on the help of everyone around her. The physical pain eventually dulled. What never dulled was what came after, the distance. Friends who used to call every week suddenly needed time to process. Business partners who once dropped by unannounced started sending emails instead. People stopped seeing the woman who had built an empire. They only saw the wheelchair. Emma refused to let it end her. She returned to the office within months, leading meetings through gritted teeth on days when simply sitting upright was exhausting. She proved, over and over, that leadership was never about standing on 2 feet. It was about the will behind the eyes. But birthdays were different. Birthdays had no boardroom to hide behind. They were just her, and whoever chose to show up. This year, her assistant had spent 3 weeks planning something special. Hundreds of invitations went out. 2 executives, 2 old college friends, 2 politicians she'd golfed with, 2 people she'd once called family. Every single one confirmed. For the first time since the accident, Emma let herself hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe success hadn't cost her everything. Then, hours before the party, the excuses started. A business emergency, a delayed flight, a sick child, traffic. One message simply said, "Can't make it." Sorry, with no explanation at all. By 6 o'clock, every single guest had canceled. Emma sat beside a cake no one would cut, in a ballroom built for 300 people, utterly alone. The silence was louder than any crowd she had ever addressed. She had spent her whole life being underestimated and had refused to let it break her. But this quiet, empty room nearly did. For the first time in years, she asked herself a question she had never let herself ask before. Had anyone ever actually cared about her? Or only about what she could do for them? At that moment, it felt like everything was over. So the question was, would she just go home and pretend this night never happened? Across town, Daniel Carter was finishing the last delivery of another long shift. 4 years earlier, cancer had taken his wife. Since then, it had been just him and his 12-year-old daughter. Lily, one income, one parent. One impossible balancing act between paying rent and being present for a little girl who had already lost too much. Daniel wasn't rich. He wasn't well connected. Most days, he was simply tired. But grief had taught him something that no business degree ever could. That showing up for someone, even with nothing to offer but your presence, mattered more than anything money could buy. His last delivery that evening happened to be at the hotel hosting Emma's party. He noticed staff quietly clearing away food that had never been touched. Curious, he asked what happened. A worker told him no one had come. Not one guest. Daniel looked across the room and saw her. A woman sitting alone beside a cake meant for hundreds, staring at chairs that would stay empty. Something about the look in her eyes stopped him cold. It was the same look he'd seen on Lily's face on the nights she cried herself to sleep after losing her mother. He didn't think about it. He didn't calculate the risk of looking foolish or the awkwardness of walking uninvited into a stranger's private grief. He simply asked the hotel manager one question. "Are guests still allowed inside?" The manager hesitated, then nodded. Daniel walked back out to his delivery van, lifted Lily down, and took her hand. "I may not belong in that room," he thought, "but nobody deserves to sit in it alone." They walked in together, a man still in his delivery uniform, and a little girl holding a gift wrapped in printer paper and colored marker instead of ribbon. Emma looked up, startled. As they approached, these weren't guests from her list. She had never met them in her life. Daniel explained simply. They hadn't been invited. He knew that, but he couldn't stand the thought of walking past a birthday with no one in the room to share it. Lily stepped forward, shy, and held out a card she'd drawn during her school lunch break. 3 stick figures smiling around a birthday cake, the sun drawn in yellow crayon above them. Inside, in careful handwriting, were 6 words. Nobody deserves to feel forgotten. Emma's composure, the same composure that had carried her through boardrooms, through physical therapy, through years of being underestimated, finally broke. Not from pain this time, from something gentler. One of the hotel staff, watching from across the room, quietly stepped forward and relit the birthday candles. Another brought out coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. A pianist, who had already packed away his sheet music for the night, sat back down and began playing Happy Birthday softly, almost like he was afraid to disturb the moment. And this is exactly why stories like these are shared here on Unstoppable Stories. Because sometimes the biggest victories begin in the darkest, quietest moments, when no one is watching and nothing is expected in return. One by one, the staff who had worked all day preparing a party for people who never came decided to stay anyway. Security guards drifted over. Housekeepers set down their carts to clap along. Waiters began serving food that had been meant for 300 people who would never eat it, to a room of a dozen strangers who had chosen, in that moment, to become something else entirely. Emma looked around the ballroom in disbelief. The people she had spent a lifetime trying to impress had not shown up. The people she had never once noticed: a delivery driver, a hotel pianist, a housekeeping staff on their way home had become her family for one night. Over dinner, Daniel spoke honestly about the last 4 years, about learning to raise a daughter alone, about the nights he didn't think he'd make it either, about how grief teaches you that showing up for someone matters more than knowing the right thing to say. Emma listened, and for the first time since the accident, she felt something shift inside her. Not pity for herself, but clarity. She had spent years measuring her worth by what she'd built: revenue, headlines, boardroom respect. But sitting in that ballroom, surrounded by people who owed her nothing and had given her everything, she understood that compassion could never be measured the way she measured a balance sheet. She wasn't the same woman who had walked or wheeled into that ballroom 3 hours earlier. The following Monday, Emma called an all-staff meeting at company headquarters. Everyone expected another product launch, another expansion announcement. Instead, she introduced something new: a foundation for single parents, caregivers, and people rebuilding their lives after injury or loss. She called it the Empty Chair Initiative, a permanent reminder that no one should have to face life's hardest nights with no one beside them. She offered Daniel a leadership role, running the foundation's community outreach. He hesitated at first, certain someone more qualified deserved it. But Emma had learned something the business world too often forgets. Character isn't a resume line. Integrity is what a person does when there's nothing in it for them. And Daniel had already proven his walking through a door everyone else had walked past. Within a year, thousands of families going through exactly what Daniel and Lily had lived through received real support because one father decided a stranger shouldn't spend her birthday alone. Emma still keeps Lily's handmade card on her office desk. When hard decisions come across her desk now, she reads it again. Nobody deserves to feel forgotten. Those 6 words became the foundation of everything the company does now. Success, for Emma, stopped being measured only in profit. It started being measured in lives changed. This story didn't end with everything fixed overnight. Emma still has hard days. Daniel still works long hours to give Lily a stable life. Grief doesn't disappear just because something good grows out of it. And rebuilding trust in people takes far longer than one good night ever could. That's the truth about most turning points. They rarely erase what came before them. They just prove that something different is still possible. The people Emma expected to fill that ballroom never showed up. The people she never expected walked in anyway and stayed. That's the part of this story worth carrying with you. The moments that hurt the most, the nights that feel the emptiest, are sometimes exactly where the truest connections are waiting to be found. Not from the people you thought mattered most, from the people willing to simply show up. Your current situation, however lonely, however overlooked it feels right now, does not tell you who will still be standing there when it counts. This is Unstoppable Stories. Because every great success story begins the moment someone refuses to let another person feel forgotten. Have you ever had someone show up for you when you least expected it, or needed to be that person for someone else? Tell us in the comments below. If this story reminded you that kindness still exists in the world, subscribe to Unstoppable Stories for more powerful, true-to-life journeys of resilience, courage, and second chances.